Hello and welcome to another edition of TechLaunch in the News. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome to another edition of AI and machine learning in the news. In this particular edition, we're going to start by looking at an article that talks about military AI and how it speeds up human decision making. Now, one of the key takeaways that we want to point out with AI and generally machine learning is there is kind of a lack of clarity between where those kind of lines are drawn between AI and machine learning. Now, you can see here one of the interesting things they talk about right away is that, let me just zoom this in a bit for you. Basically, differentiating AI from machine learning is a struggle, and that we see AI as a broad umbrella term with machine learning as the heartbeat of AI. And that really enables actual applications with putting in data and getting an outcome rather than just data and tools. So the idea is that they are essentially able to do things, and this article goes on to talk about this in quite a bit of detail, but they're able to do things that are really kind of mundane in most cases, but that are really critical from a logistical perspective. And what I mean by that is if you take the example of maintenance of airplanes, which you can see is kind of highlighted here, getting maintenance readiness above 50 to 60% will impact the whole defense community in this case. So there's a big push toward making the readiness of aircraft for the military much higher readiness level. And believe it or not, this is one of the biggest challenges with military aircraft. They're very specific and they are relatively fickle because some of them are they're really expensive. They're hard to maintain. They're operating at extremes. And so they're really, really logistically challenging to maintain relative to, say, like a car. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about that. So there have to be maintenance logs and detailed records and processes that folks have to follow for all the different airplanes. Anyway, the point is that AI allows this kind of speeding up of the human decision making. And you can see this article says whether the human in question is a maintainer at the depot level, a fighter pilot who's processing a lot of inputs, or an ISR specialist analyzing data from a UAS sensor, so an unmanned aerial system. It basically, there are so many decisions that need to be made that can overwhelm the cognitive load of a human mind. And that's really one of the key aspects of AI and machine learning that we want to encourage you to be thinking about is just really kind of unburdening or kind of enhancing human performance as a general high payoff area to focus with AI and machine learning. Okay, let's take a look at the next article now. Okay, so this article is pretty interesting because it specifically goes into this AI-based Q Shield system, as it's called, and how it solved the first missing person case. So in this specific case, it assisted law enforcement in Georgia to allocate and return home an elderly man suffering from cognitive memory impairment. And the missing person was found 150 miles away in Savannah, Georgia, within 3 hours and returned home safely. Now, this particular system is pretty interesting. So it uses a patent neural network of algorithms that imitate human brains for pattern recognition and decision making. And they have more than 17,000 AI-based machine vision sensors worldwide, 7,000 of those being in the US. That in and of itself is pretty interesting that they have that many of these devices all over the world. I hadn't heard of these guys before, so I found that to be pretty interesting. Without going into a ton of detail, what was kind of the summary here is from the time that the Strickland Adrian PD chief was alerted, we found this person 150 miles away in 3 hours. So from the time they were alerted, they found this person 3 hours later. Without the technology, he says, we absolutely wouldn't have found him as quickly. Okay. And he's saying that he thinks they may not have found him at all. So saving this one life has made the system worth it. And they're talking about their investment. This is a really interesting application for AI where basically it gets into some potential kind of legal issues with people being monitored by AI with a supposed benign intent. But in theory, it I mean, it really can help a lot. And there are going to be some gray areas there with surveillance state coming to mind as a concern, but a benefit being, of course, helping out with law enforcement and that kind of a thing when maybe somebody actually needs support from law enforcement. Okay, so it's going to continue to be a interesting topic. We'll continue to follow it. The next article here talks about how basically there's ongoing effort from different just overall cloud providers, but in this case, Amazon now, where they're providing a code copilot that's essentially very similar. They call it Amazon CodeWhisperer. It's similar to the GitHub Code Copilot. And so here you can see the CodeWhisperer offers code recommendations based on contextual information, such as past code that a developer has written, and natural language prompts, such as generate a subroutine to upload files to S3. So it's almost like a search of sorts that is going to use machine learning. And one of the really interesting things that this is talking about, it's like a template search essentially, is it automatically determines which cloud services a developer commonly uses and what the coding languages are that they typically use, the best practices. And then the other thing is it's already been trained on Amazon code and open source code. So that's really helpful that it's already been pre-trained. And it also has at least a mention about security precautions and protections against bias. So obviously we'll see, the proof is in the pudding, but you can see a little bit of competition heating up here between Amazon and then Microsoft owned GitHub, and how these big Goliaths are going to be battling it out in AI in a very kind of prominent way in this kind of code assistance role for AI. Of course, as always, we'll continue to follow this. Definitely an interesting development now. Okay, and last but not least, we wanted to go into a somewhat interesting piece here, and I'm going to kind of summarize it, but the idea is that in the real estate market, there's kind of a lot of hype around blockchain being able to take over on a lot of things. But as it turns out, artificial intelligence and machine learning have really gotten a lot more traction. Why blockchain? Why would blockchain potentially take over and do a lot? Well, the theory would be for transactional integrity, right? And kind of democratizing this kind of very human-centric and approval processed, legal documents and holding periods and reviews and things like that are quite expensive too. Expensive transactions and such. As it turns out, artificial intelligence and machine learning are the most understood and deployed within this kind of real estate scenario. And this article goes on to say that really blockchain is more fuzzy to many and has yet to really get a lot of traction. And so there are a lot of theoretical use cases, but not actual deployments. And without going into a ton of detail around AI and machine learning, the big thing with AI and machine learning is it's really beneficial to these real estate focused companies around analyzing credit risk and being able to look at different inputs and kind of associate outputs to what would actually typically occur with a different deal type and a different lender, a different loan, and again, a different person taking the loan, all of those things. And they've developed some incredible models that are really, really effective, that work really, really well. And they're so entrenched with the overall major institutions now with AI and machine learning that assists in or drives a lot of this kind of decision making and credit risk analysis, that it really has taken the lead compared to blockchain. So, okay, well, what about blockchain? Is it really going to be an opportunity? And this is kind of interesting to look at whenever you're evaluating AI and machine learning is, what are some real technologies that can hopefully help and continue to drive momentum for AI and machine learning? Well, in theory, this blockchain would really go hand in hand with AI and machine learning. But as it turns out, it's pretty challenging to deal with kind of some of the processes that are currently very entrenched into kind of, human-centric manual steps. So this is a list of some of the promising areas where if you have blockchain, you could kind of benefit from it. But again, you kind of go through the list and you see that essentially blockchain is not substantially doing most of these things yet. So the theory is that because blockchain isn't really doing these things yet, will it ever gain momentum? And one of the comments here is this phrase block change, and it requires a major change. And that's really why you're seeing a lot of progress with AI and machine learning. It's really going at the market inevitably as not a massive change. It's just a supplementer to the process. And that's one of the reasons it's so successful. It's augmenting and assisting the existing processes that folks are already using until it can then gracefully take over. Whereas block change is required to get blockchain implemented. So definitely an interesting thought if you're kind of looking at transforming an industry and working within AI and machine learning and kind of seeing where it's working and getting traction. It's working and getting traction where you can augment the process, where you can supplement it and drive noticeable and tangible improvements incrementally, and then leverage that to build on itself. And that can be an exponential growth. But changing everything at once is really, really challenging, as demonstrated by blockchain. We hope that this video was really helpful for you. We will continue to provide updates and news for AI and machine learning. Thanks for watching this edition of TechLaunch in the News. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe so you can see more in the news resources. We also have complimentary masterclasses and other resources available to you on our website, www.gotechlaunch.com. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them in the comments section. And until next time, thanks for watching and bye for now.